I started my aviation career with the Navy, and the reason I was in the Navy, I was in the Navy ROTC program at University of Michigan. So that was my way to get through college. The Navy paid for that, and so I decided, as long as I was going to be in the Navy, that I might as well be a pilot. And I guess I had an interest in being a pilot, when I was younger in aviation. So once I received a commission, 1969 at Michigan, went immediately to flight training down in Pensacola, and progressed through the flight training program. And once I completed the flight training program, you were assigned aircraft on your position with your standing within your class and the needs of the Navy. So I was selected when it got down to me, I was selected for A3s, which I didn't have any idea what an A3 looked like. But it turned out to be a pretty good deal because we were based in Alameda, California, which is right across the bay from San Francisco. So went out to Alameda and started training in the A3. And the A3 was designed back in the early 50s to be the Navy's all-weather nuclear bomber and carry the nuclear bomb at the time. And that was shortly after World War II, so the bomb was quite large. So they had this big airplane designed with this big bomb bay. And by the time they got the airplane flying, I think they had refined the nuclear weapon so it was a lot smaller, could be carried on other aircraft. But they did use the A3 as a bomber, probably, I guess the first time early in the 56. And I've seen records of it still used as a bomber up until the mid-60s. And that time, I think it kind of converted it to a tanker. They called it was first an A3, then it was a KA3, K for a tanker. And they put a big fuel bladder in the bomb bay with a hose reel, which you'll see later extends out the back, and with a folding basket on it that the other aircraft would plug into. So we could give away like 3,000 gallons of fuel that we could, and they had pumped it. The reason they liked the A3, other aircraft could have they call it a drop tank that they could use a buddy store, they called it, they could tank off of that, but their hose was much smaller, their pumping rate was less, so they liked the A3 as a tanker on board the aircraft carrier. So we could pump, 240 gallons a minute to another aircraft. So and then as the airplane evolved, when I got the airplane, I got my wings in 1970, went through final training and got, first cruise I took was in 1971, 72 time frame. But by the time I got into the aircraft, it was a tanker, but they'd also converted it to electronic jamming equipment. So when they were bombing, when we Gulf of Tonkin, we were bombing North Vietnam, they had SAM missiles. And so our equipment would pick up the signal that was sent out by the SAM tracking stations, and we would send back a big pulse of energy that would not allow them to track with their missiles. So they could shoot the missiles, but they would just go ballistic. And our bombing aircraft, the A7s or A6s, could outmaneuver a missile once it was wasn't accelerating, because they would see it. They say it would come up and look like a telephone pole coming up. Well, it's still accelerating. So that was very effective jamming, and our jamming range was 25 miles from the target, and a lot of our targets were along the coast, so we stayed out over the water, so we were relatively safe. But when we went aboard the ship, when we were operating on the ship, the normal cycle when we were during the Vietnam time, which I was part of, we flew 12 hours on, 12 hours off. That's the deck people and the carrier operations. During that time, we would have probably about 7 cycles. That would be 7 takeoffs, 7 missions, and they come back. So it was a continuous cycle. Once the first aircraft took off, they would park all the airplanes to the rear of the ship, and then they would all taxi forward onto 4 catapults that the ship had, and they were steam catapults. They would launch, And as soon as they were launched, they'd get another set of aircraft, might be 15, 20 aircraft, parked around the back of the airplane again, and then they would, in another hour, they would launch, and then they would recover the first cycle. So it would be a continuous cycle. So the A-3 was the tanker, so we would go off first and climb up to around 10,000 feet, and then the F-4s would come behind us, and they weren't, the F-4s were a fighter aircraft, but it wasn't, they were also used as a bomber, and not necessarily designed for that purpose, but they used a lot of fuel just to get airborne, and they used afterburners. So to climb up to 10,000 feet, they would usually take some fuel before they ever went on their mission, so that make sure they had enough to get back. And then we'd stay around the ship unless we were, sometimes when we were maybe 80 miles off the coast, we would fly north to a couple F-4s that were on station, protecting us from anybody that might fly out from the MiGs or something that would fly out from North Vietnam. So we would fly up there, top them off, and then we would come back to the ship and and meet the aircraft when they came back. So then we would, you'll see on the video that I'm going to show you that the tanker would come up, the second tanker would come up in the second flight. He would be checked out by the tanker that's already in the air and make sure the tanker package worked, and then would transfer any fuel that the first tanker had was going to land, because you could only land with so much fuel weight-wise, because there was restrictions on how much weight you could land aboard the ship. And that's how the cycles would go. The catapults were a steam-powered catapult, and there was a mechanism to attach. Each airplane had a different method of attaching to the catapult, but every airplane had a holdback. In the rear of the airplane, there was a mechanical link that would be attached to the aircraft, and that would hold the airplane at full power. In the movie, you'll see when you get into the catapult in position, the catapult officer gives you the signal to rev up. You go full power with the airplane with your feet off the brakes, and then when you're ready to go and your engines are checked and everything, then you give the catapult officer a salute. He touches the deck, and the enlisted guy will fire the catapult, and then you're off. In a couple seconds, you go from 0 to 150 miles an hour. So it's a pretty good ride. And then when you're coming back to the ship, there's 4 wires in the back of stretched across the back of the ship, and so and there go to a big reel underneath, and they're about, those wires are about 1.5 inches, 2 inches diameter, so they're pretty heavy. But the tail hook would grab a hold of one of those wires and then would play out with the reels to slow you down. But the same thing there, you would go to full power as soon as you touch down. In case you didn't catch a wire, the carrier had an angled deck, so you can take off and go back around again and try to make another attempt at a landing. So those are the things that you would see, and then each worker, the man on the deck had a different job, and they all were designated by different colors. So when you're looking at somebody, if he was a ordnance man or if he was a yellow shirt, he was the plane directors on the ship on the deck that would direct the airplanes around and bring them out and set them on the catapult. During the cruises I was on the USS Constellation during the 71, 72, I had a movie camera, and I took different clips throughout the cruise, and I spliced them all together in the sequence of a flight just to show people what a typical carrier operation was like. So this is the A-3 that just landed here, and you can see that the flight deck director taxis the aircraft around, and he'll point you over to someone else, to the next guy. So he stays in one spot as the aircraft land, and see the wings are folded for make room on the aircraft. Now, as the aircraft land, they park them all up forward, one at a time, so there's room still on the angled deck until everybody lands. You see that probe in the front, that's for refueling, and you'll see that used later. But this is an A6 that's landing here. And he's also a tanker, see, because he's got all those fuel tanks hanging underneath, and he has a way to refuel in the air from an A6. That's an A6. Normally they were bombing, but they also could convert into a tanker with that portable tanker package. Every operation, when we were operating at sea, they'd have a helicopter also in the air. So now that after all the aircraft have landed, now they got to move all the aircraft to the aft part of the ship, where they be refueled, reloaded with bombs or whatever they were carrying. And so then that starts the cycle again for the next, and that takes about an hour, and all these aircraft will be refueled and ready to go. Load of mail comes aboard. And everything is still moved by hand. Now we're starting to do a pre-flight. Next crew comes on to fly the airplane, and this happened to be the flight that I took. So I'm doing the walk around, and our maintenance guys, they still load, they push everything around by hand, they still load these bombs, and I think these are, I thought they were 500 pounders, I'm not sure. That's an A7. A is for attack aircraft, and F4s are for fighters. But they're loading these bombs onto the A7, and they had to load them by hand. So I think this was probably I don't know if it was a 500 pounder or a 250. There's only 2 or 3 guys picking it up. So, but see on the front here where they have that flag, that there was a laser guided bombs, and that was the laser guided system on the front. You can imagine as the ship turns, it lists as it goes into a turn. So these guys are pushing these bomb carts, pushing them uphill. And here's a F4 loaded, and it's on top of a. Besides the bombs, they carry a couple missiles also for air defense. So you can imagine what these F4s that use all the fuel to take off. But everybody's working on their airplanes around it, and you're under a time crunch here because they got to get going. But all the aircraft are tied down. If you look around, you see on the back there's tie-down chains, because the aircraft carrier does make a turn, and it does list a little bit. So if you weren't tied down, there's a chance that the aircraft could move. But we had in A3, we had it was a single pilot aircraft. So I was a pilot, and we had a navigator. Bombardier navigator. It used to be a bombardier when it was bombing, but mainly he was running the tanker package, and there was some operations that needed 2 men to operate. There's a good look at the probe on the side of the airplane. And see that blister on the side? That's also that's for the electronic jamming equipment, the antenna for the. And there's also another blister on the bottom that holds the antennas. That's an F4 there. But you can see it shortly. You'll see them all. They're all lined up. Right there's a good picture of how they're lined up around the fantail of the airplane. And right now we're going through the pre-checks and check your tail hook, check your, all the equipment's working, and then you'll all the aircraft start up at the same time, and they'll move out one at a time. And they'll move up to the catapult. And that 602 right in the front there was the A5 Vigilante. That was a photo aircraft. But they're pretty tight. You can see how tight they are in the back. And the enlisted guys got to be careful, because when they start bringing the aircraft out of the pack, if they turn the tail on you when the engines are running, you could get blown off the side. If you see right now where the airplane is coming out, everybody on deck has to be careful, because the jet blast. And we did have one guy almost go over the side. He's holding on to the tie-down chain, and he got so hot he had to let go. And around the carrier, there's a net, and he got blown into the net, and it didn't go over the side. Yeah, it was pretty serious. So now here, there's catapults on the side, and there's catapults up front. So now the aircrafts they're being positioned to put on the catapult. And here's the F4 moving up on the catapult now. And you have 2 or 3 guys have different jobs. The guys in the green shirts, the guy's in a white shirt, he's a safety guy. They're checking for safety procedures, and everything is that everything's hooked up correctly. They just go off one at a time. Now that the F-4s, they'll circle up to 10,000 feet go up to the tanker. See, if you look back here, you see there's that mechanical holdback. The guy was hooking up, just crawling out from under the airplane. He hooks that holdback up, and then they got to move the aircraft forward just very slowly to engage that. And now up front, you can see him hooking up the sling to the forward part for the catapult to tow the airplane. It's a pretty dangerous place to work because everybody's crawling around on the deck, and there's a lot of things going on up there, and it's very noisy. You can see it's getting kind of cleared out back there now. You can see the aircraft director in the front directing the aircraft. And shortly he'll transfer over, you point to someone else, and then you look over there and someone else will be. As soon as you have the room, then now you notice it lining you up on a catapult. See the catapult track. Of course, the catapult equipment is all underneath the flight deck. Just a simple track slot where the catapult shuttle protrudes above the deck, and the guy's yellow shirt is very precise on getting you directly lined up on the catapult. They have a helicopter that I tell you it operates all the time while your operations are going on. If somebody should fall over the side or an airplane should go in the water, they can't stop the ship until all aircraft are either launched or recovered. So, and also there's a destroyer that follows the ships called the plane guard. He's also there for that purpose, to any kind of rescue. Now here's a guy putting you on the catapult. See, now he gives you the signal to go full power, turns you over to the catapult officer, and now when you're ready, you salute him. He touches the deck, you fire the catapult. And from that time right there is about 0 to about 150. So then our job now would be to climb up. How we start now, we climb up to 10,000 feet above the ship in a big circle around the ship, and all the aircraft that need fuel will come up and rendezvous with the tanker. But also before I can give any fuel to someone else, I have to have someone check out my tanker package. So the tanker that's already up there, and I think it was an A6, he'll come back, drop back, check out my tanker package. Then I'll get behind him and take any fuel that he has to give me, because I couldn't take off with a full load of fuel, so I have room for some extra fuel to put on. But that's what the ship looks like. Here's the A6 that's up there now. So you see that floating basket behind it? It's got feathers on it that holds it out. That thing can fold up when they pull it in. But I fly that probe that's on the front of my airplane and fly that right into the basket. And there's usually a green light that comes on up underneath the aircraft, if you can see it. See how the basket goes back in? Now he'll swing down. He'll go behind my aircraft, do the same thing. And you do all this you don't have to talk to anybody. You all know, everybody knows what they're doing. The F-4s come up, you know how much fuel you got to give them. They come up one at a time. You can see them all there in formation. their probe comes out from the side. It's a little more difficult for them to. Right now, the F4s are tanking. I got pictures there of F4s that are tanking off the A6. And we're all flying around the ship, 250 knots, just, a big circle around the ship till all the F4s get their fuel. They're the only ones, the F4s are the only ones that needed fuel before they left. The A7s and the A6s, they didn't burn that much fuel. So you can see the probe come out now from the side of and that's out to the side of the pilot, so it's not that easy for him to direct it. And he'll fly that. Once he flies in, there's a little locking mechanism, and he has to push the hose in just a foot, and that signals to us in the cockpit that he's hooked up, and then we can start to fuel. That's the F5, the Vigilante. The guy in the back, see that little window in the back? He's a photo operator, and that's the only window he has. It's kind of, I don't know how they do it. It's kind of claustrophobic, I think, but. That's the plane they send in after they bomb a target, and they send the photo bird in. Now we're refueling again. I see you get a good shot of the basket stuck on the end of the probe. See, now he's dumping fuel. That A6 that was just up there tanking, he's going to land, and any extra fuel that he has, he's got to just dump it. Wasted a lot of fuel a lot of times. Now after everybody's tanked, now I was telling you we got a navigator now. He's plotting a route up to rendezvous with two F4s that were up on station between us and between us and North Vietnam. And there was a picket ship down in the water, always on station. So he was directing with the radar picket ship to keep an eye out for MiGs, and he would be directing the F4s to rendezvous with us. So we're up there now. Sometimes from where we were, we could see Hanoi and Haiphong Harbor and all that, because we were only 40 miles, 50 miles away, and it's a clear day. You're always glad to see the F4s come up, because we were pretty much defenseless out there. When you're flying formation, they always come up like that, like on a 45 degree, and you're just kind of looks like they're just sliding up a ramp, but everybody just comes up like that, and they just kind of close on you, because you're flying in a circle, and they move up in formation. Pretty easy in the daytime, but at nighttime it's, because all they got to see is from a distance a little red light. That's a good shot of their probe coming out. So usually by the time that we finish tanking the two of them, we'll head back to the ship, and by that time aircraft have started to come back from their missions. If not, we just go back there and hang around, fly around the ship. But see, now by that time, as soon as we get back, they've started the other launches are already taken place before the other aircraft land. So here's another tanker has just come up. So now we're doing the same thing with them. We check out his tanker package, plug in just for a little bit, see if he can transfer fuel. And then we would, if he's going to stay up there, we would pass any fuel on to him before we land. As the aircraft come back to land, if they have someone, you know, because normally you would have enough fuel to make 4 or 5 attempts at landing. So if somebody's having trouble getting aboard, our job would be kind of to mirror them as they're making their approach. And if they miss, then we'd pull right up. If they're going to tank, we'd pull right out in front of them, we'd put our hose out, and they would pick up some fuel, and they'd go back and try it again. We always had enough fuel. We always saved enough fuel to make, you know, we're usually 80 miles from Da Nang or someplace, and they had a bingo field. If somebody really got desperate and couldn't, for some reason, couldn't land, you try to have enough fuel left to make it, in case you can't tank too, or some reason. But usually, I don't think I had anybody that had to go that route, and usually you would just be able to take on some fuel, eventually get aboard. If the deck was pitching or something, some guys would have a little more trouble than others, but here's what it looks like, the ship looked like when we're flying around when they're landing. Now, if that guy missed, we'd just be able to pick him up. See how the deck is angled? And they make their approach. That's how it works. If you miss some of these photos I took where the people were practicing, we didn't even have the hook down, but he's got his hook down now, and he's grabbing a wire. And look, that cable plays out pretty good. See, now, if a guy, there's an LSO out there, if he doesn't like your approach, he'll wave you off, or if something's not right, the cables aren't set, and they would wave you off. You just fly around, do a go around, just like. So now we're getting ready to come in for approach, and we're dumping fuel, any extra fuel that we might have. So the only thing you had for lineup is the lineup on the deck, and then for your vertical guidance on the left-hand side, they have what they call the meatball or Fresnel lens. You'll look at it, you'll see it here in a minute. You'll see a horizontal line of green lights and an orange ball in the middle, and you look at that to tell you whether you're high or. You look now, you can see the ball. The orange ball is in the center. As long as you keep that orange ball in the center and line up with the ship, and you pretty much see if you miss, you just bounce. You add full power as soon as you touch down, and if you don't get a wire, you're still back at flying speed pretty much. So I had this camera mounted on the dashboard, so you know there's no way you could hold on to it. There's the LSO on the deck. He's watching you, giving you some guidance. They just stand out there and they've watched enough airplanes come and go that, you know, add power, or they give you some little tweak if you have to, and if not, they don't like it, they wave you off. You can see the orange ball there. The orange ball will go down a little bit, it'll drop down a little bit just as you get close. It's pretty much a controlled crash. A little flare to it, but not a whole lot. You see all the other aircraft up forward that already landed. The guy tell you to fold your wings. This is pretty much the same thing at the beginning of the video. all the aircraft are up forward. Park the airplane and it starts all over again. Pretty much all there is to it. I probably never thought it was possible, you know. I had built model airplanes like, you know, I always built model airplanes, and so I guess I had you know, and I had a scrapbook with a bunch of airplanes in it, so obviously I must have had an interest when I was small, but I think when I was in high school I didn't say, well, I'm going to be a pilot, or you know, I'm going to go in the Navy and be a pilot. It just happened, the opportunity presented itself, and I said, well, you know, if I'm going to go in the Navy, I can be a pilot, so, and that worked out well. My dad was teaching welding at adult classes at night, and he came home and said, hey, this guy told me his son's going to school for Navy ROTC, and they're paying for tuition, books, and $50 a month. He said, why don't you look into it? So then I went to our guidance counselor at our school, and he said, huh? He said, well, why don't you talk to Navy recruiter and let me know what you find out. So that, and well, the Air Force, and that's why I went probably with the Navy, first of all. And second of all, the Army and the Air Force at that time didn't pay for the first 2 years. And I think after, you know, third and fourth year, they did pay something, but I don't think they even picked up books and tuition. So Navy at the time, and Navy was only had 50 schools in the country that, you know, in the Army, Air Force, I think they were probably at a lot of schools because they didn't pay. I never even considered the Army or the Air Force. And I guess I just thought I'd go in the Navy, and I think I had intention to fly right from the start, because if I had to be in the Navy, I don't think I wanted to be on a ship, so. We got our wings in Beeville. That's where I finished up. Beeville, Texas. My mother, father, and Linda came down, and Linda pinned my wings on before we were married. No, it was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed, you know, when we were on cruise, Linda followed the ship around. So it was, even though it was a war going on, for me it was a good experience, an exciting time. So led to where I am today. So it was a good deal. We have a little group of, you know, A3 people that we get together. Of course, some of them we're losing some of them every year too. So it was a small group to start with, because we only had 3 airplanes and 13 officers. But you know, my good friend in Buffalo, he was an A3 guy. I got out of the Navy in '74, and during that time it was a bad time with the fuel crunch going on, and the airlines wouldn't even take any. And I had sent a application to Gannett newspapers back in Rochester, where I was from, and they never responded. And the only reason I got in there eventually, I took a job at a civil engineering firm for a while, and I kept still looking at flying jobs and stuff. But I got in the Navy in '74, and I didn't get a flying job with Gannett newspapers till '76. And I happened to, my uncle knew, had at the marina next to him was the head of the FAA in Rochester. So he said, yeah, come on up, I'll introduce you to some people. So he got me in the door at Gannett, and it took me a whole year after that. I stopped there once a month, you know, until they finally hired somebody. And then, you know, I was lucky to get in there. Because they wanted people that are getting these Falcon 20s, and they wanted qualified Falcon 20 people, and they couldn't find any, so they hired me. No, it's just luck, you know, that's how you luck out. You know, you get in, first meeting, that guy gets me in the door, because they didn't even, you know, when I sent them an application, they don't even respond to you, so. And then I got, you know, from there, I kept knocking on the door at airlines, and I was able to get into United.